Broadcast now. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Today, we have an excellent discussion on the top 2022 emergent security threats. Let's quickly cover logistics. If you get disconnected, please rejoin using the same link that you originally used to log in. Your microphone is muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We already have several audience questions, and we will answer as many as we can, and please continue to send them in. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll circulate the recording along with the slides for you to view on demand. I'm your host today, Andrew Saluk. Our broadcast is presented by Topo AI. Our product, Topo One, is a critical event and incidents platform. Our customers rely on our platform for a wide variety of security use cases, including assessing and responding to emergent threats. Customers can click on an alert for more detailed information to rapidly determine potential impacts. And then based on their assessment, they can quickly contact at-risk personnel with shelter-in-place orders or other instructions. And they continue to use Topo One to monitor and manage any emergent threats according to their policies and evolving conditions on the ground. Now, today's webinar is not about our product, but if you'd like to learn more, there will be an opportunity to let us know toward the end of the broadcast. Let's meet our panelists. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jenny Hesterman. Jenny is a retired Air Force colonel whose last assignment was Vice Commander of Andrews Air Force Base. She's also the author of Soft Target Hardening, Protecting People from Attack, which is literally the only textbook on the topic. And Jenny also serves as the VP of Education Services at Watermark Risk Management International, which is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. And Watermark provides subject matter experts like Jenny across multiple technical and professional services, including risk management, multidiscipline security, program security and management, threat and vulnerability assessments, and many others. Watermark has three main service areas: risk management, training and education, and government and commercial services. Welcome back to the program, Jenny.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's my great pleasure, and I'll unshare my slides so that you can present.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. There we go. Set up here quickly. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, fantastic.
You're showing the slides. Oh, there we go. You're presenting now. Thank you.
Is it good? Okay, fantastic. Yes, thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much to Scott, Andrew, and Topo AI for hosting me today and for giving me a platform to share with you some of my recent research on emergent threats, what's happening right now in the threat environment, and also how can you respond? So what do leaders need to know? Thank you for being here today. I know you're all very busy. Next slide here. Give me a little bit of an issue. There we go. Okay, so this is an overview of what I'll cover today. We're going to talk about what I call the human condition. What's happening with humans? Humans play a huge role in our security efforts. And so we're really going to talk about what is happening with humans in security. I will go over international terror. What's happening with the big four international terror groups and how are they threatening the United States right now today? We'll talk about domestic terror and crime trends and a lot of data and groups and what's happening. And then Soft Targets 101. We're going to get into a little bit of soft target hardening and what can we do? And then finally, takeaways. So I always start with this quote: security is always seen as too much until the day it's not enough. And this is a quote from William Webster. He's the former FBI and CIA director. And I always kept this as a sticky note on my desk. My last job in the Air Force was the vice commander at Andrews Air Force Base, home of Air Force One, and 20,000 people, and a lot of government agencies and a lot of other activities that needed great protection. And we used to always ask ourselves, how big of a budget do we need for security? How many people do we need for security? It was hard to articulate those arguments sometimes and fight for resources. So this is just a great quote that I used when I was fighting for resources. And so I just like to share that with everyone. And this is what I call the security landscape. What's happening with security? And it's very stormy, which is why I use the stormy picture. It's really the perfect storm of everything. A confluence of actors, ideologies, and threats. So, but there is the sunshine shining through. There's a lot we can do, and we shouldn't feel helpless when we face what's happening. So everybody has a model. This is mine. This is the framework I use when I look at how to mitigate and protect people and organizations, facilities, and events against attack. So first we look at the target, we look at the threat, we look at vulnerability, what is the risk, and then mitigation. How do we cover the risk? How do we lower risk? Well, what I really want to focus in on is humans. Like I said before, the human aspect of what's happening in security. Humans are part of all of this. Humans are the target. Humans are the threat. Humans make us vulnerable. So we're going to start with humans. And before the pandemic started, what I was seeing in my consulting work was that there was security fatigue. People were tired of talking about security. They were tired of bag checks and airport security and just security everywhere in the news. Everything was about security. So there was a lot of fatigue growing around this topic. When I talked to people, what I found was what I call the emotional traps starting to build. One was, this is a new normal. It's just, we're going to have a mass shooting every day in our country. We're going to have terrorist attacks. This is just the new normal. So there's an acceptance. When we accept that, we stop fighting. And so that's vulnerability. There's hopelessness. There's nothing we can do about it. So different projects I worked on, I heard this defeatism in people's language. Why should I try to protect my mall against ISIS? If they're going to attack my mall, there's nothing I can do about it. That kind of language. Infallibility will never happen here. I've heard people say that all over the country. I heard somebody say that in Nebraska. I heard somebody say that in Washington, D.C. It'll never happen here because we have so much security. And then it can't happen to me. It won't happen to me. It won't happen to us. Sometimes in the guarding force, I see this. It's not going to happen to me. You can see how this vulnerability compounds in an organization. And then inescapability, if it's unavoidable, why try to mitigate? So again, these are just the emotional traps that lead to vulnerability that we need to really be careful of. Or we hope that events are one-off, that there's one Stephen Paddock from the Las Vegas massacre, there's one Omar Mateen, that there's only one bad actor out there that's going to try to pull off some type of an attack like that, or they're unique, which we know isn't true. There are quite a few people out there actually that are possibly even planning today to do a similar attack because it was successful. And now we're distracted with the pandemic, we're juggling multiple crises, and we see safety fatigue with people, and we even see compassion fatigue now setting in. So again, this human element is very important to think about when we secure our organizations. So are humans a force multiplier for us, or are they the weakest link? And if you think about the prior slide, all these mindsets that are happening and everything that's happening in society, when we tell people see something, say something, are they really engaged? Are they really looking for a bag that's out of place? Are they going to confront somebody who looks like they're about to do something nefarious? Probably not. So we can't really depend on humans right now to be our force multiplier. And this element, the human element in security, is the most difficult to address. It's easier to talk about fencing and lighting and badging and things like that than to talk about humans. But this could make or break our security efforts. And I say this cauldron of emotions and behaviors that we see in society is not only detrimental to our efforts, but it's very dangerous and it's exploitable phenomena. So talking about people, humans, human condition, I really like this, this picture because it shows that this person's going about their daily business, just like us, in the world, in the light, if you will, and they start to go to this dark place, and then they go to action. They go to an attack mode or to some kind of violent attack. So how does that happen? And this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit, but I want you to just realize that everybody starts on the left. We all start in this light place, and at some point, some people are off-roaded and get in this dark area, and that's where we really need to try to detect them and turn them around before they go to operational mode, because once they've set their mind on an attack and they have the wherewithal to carry it out, it's very difficult to turn them back, as we know. So let's talk about ideology a little bit. Ideology is a very powerful force in society. And this quote is great from Karl Marx. They do not know it, but they're doing it. And of course, Marxism was about implanting certain ideas and thoughts in the population so that they did things for the government without really considering what they were doing, like working and giving all their money to the government, things like that. So it's something absolutely vast and powerful beyond all perception and objective intelligibility. It's in you more than yourself. These are quotes from The Sublime Object of Ideology. If you're interested in ideology, this is a great book to read. So very powerful and really can shift society, as we've seen in the last few years. And this is from a Saudi Arabian newspaper, actually. And it kind of shows the brain, as it's being trained and it's being turned around as a sheep almost. And this is what happens with radicalization. So why do people radicalize? That's the million-dollar question, right? What drives a rational person towards a radical ideology or a group? And there's many theories at play here. There's instinct theory, that it's really not a conscious or purposeful or rational behavior. It's just instinctive that they go towards a group and then go towards some type of violent attack. Reinforcement theory, this is behaviors influenced by immediate rewards. And this is, they get their name in the press. People tell them they're a hero, things like that. And then there's a cognitive theory, which is your behavior is influenced by future rewards. And this is more in the religious realm, where you're martyred and in the afterlife you receive your reward. So there's a lot of soft sciences at play here in terms of psychology and sociology. But this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And really, we're looking at the need for affiliation. And this is a person's need to feel a sense of involvement and belonging within a social group. And we all do this. So if you're an alumni of a university, maybe you belong to an alumni group. If you find out, for instance, that you're sick, like you have cancer, you reach out, you find other people who have cancer to talk to. So we all do this. We all reach out and try to find our people. Anxiety and stress feeds the need for affiliation. And so the pandemic literally fed the beast on this. People were reaching out. Everybody was scared. Everybody was online, which bad actors leveraged. And so the pandemic really stepped up people reaching out, and the bad actors were ready to engage. So what is extremism? Extremism is advocacy of extreme measures or views, or radicalism. Radicalism is favoring extreme changes in existing views, habits, conditions, or institutions. So I think it's important to have foundational definitions for a lot of these words because they're thrown around sometimes. So I always like to provide a definition to get a good baseline. So there's two types of extremism. One is nonviolent, and this is written and spoken extremism. And as we know, Anwar al-Awlaki was a radical cleric, and he influenced Nidal Hasan for the Fort Hood shooting and several other terrorist attacks. He didn't pull the trigger, but he had blood on his hands. And of course, the United States found him in Yemen and killed him. And he was a terrorist, but it was written and spoken. Now we also have violent extremism, and this is the gun bullet extremism that we call it. And this is George Georgelas. He was a Texas resident, and he went and he joined ISIS to fight in Syria. So there are different types of extremism when you break it down. And nonviolent, it could be writing, could be think tanks. It looks like it's peaceful in orientation sometimes when we investigate it, and it might be seen as a vent. Sometimes we like to give people a little bit of a platform. We think if they use that platform, maybe they'll get their views out there and kind of go away and won't do anything violent. That usually doesn't work. But sometimes the views don't further peace and harmony in society, and this is when we're starting to get to this violent extremism. And nonviolent extremism is inspiring, inciting, recruiting, boosting morale, and fundraising. So that's all part of extremism. And again, here's another great book. I have a lot of good book suggestions for you. This violent and nonviolent extremism, two sides of the same coin. It's very interesting. So in terms of violent extremism, we all have ideologies about the environment, about religion, about the economy, a political ideology, but we can all survive with each other, in the room. We all get along, everything's fine. We can all bring who we are to the table. The problem with violent extremists is they can't live with opposing views. They're either going to try to convert you or eliminate you. And this is where it's gone from an ideology and a group into the violent spectrum. And if they think their beliefs or way of life are under attack, then they're going to lash out. So how do people radicalize? The internet. The internet accelerates the speed of radicalization. It provides instant interface between recruiters and recruits, and there's 24/7 access to tactical information. No matter how many times the government takes down websites, how to make ricin, for instance, or Anwar al-Awlaki's sermons. I can find his MP4 sermons still on the internet. So it's out there forever when people post things out there. It's impossible to take down. So you can go to the computer, you can type in, what you're looking for, and you're going to be able to find it instantly. And I thought this was really interesting. 2021, here's the most widely used social media platforms. This was a little bit different than what I thought. So shifting now into terrorism, I like to say that the battlefield isn't a place, it's in the mind. And as we just talked about, it's ideology. The ideology is the glue that holds these groups together. It's not a leader. We just removed ISIS leader. It had no impact on ISIS. They'll probably just appoint some other leader. We may not even know who it is. And honestly, it doesn't even really matter. It's the ideology, and the internet's the vehicle. So what is terrorism? Again, I like to start with our foundational definitions from the Latin word for great fear. A terrorist uses violence or a threat of violence to kill, cause fear, intimidate, or coerce. And a terrorist act translates those intentions into action. The challenge we have in the United States is the definition of a terrorist, and a terrorist act is still in debate, as we see. The truck into crowd incident in New York City, when the individual drove his truck up onto the bike path and killed 7 people, he lived. He immediately got out and professed his adoration for ISIS, that he was a tool of ISIS. He had ISIS propaganda in the cab of the truck, but they still tripped over the word terrorist. And what you see in a lot of these cases is what people were charged with, and then what they're finally convicted of is different. Somewhere along the line it changes. So this is a huge challenge in the prosecutorial realm. So the State Department designates the foreign terrorist organizations, and these are groups who have verbalized that they want to attack the United States or citizens of the US abroad, and that they have the wherewithal to do it. They have the capability to do it. So there's 72 FTOs on the list. And I like to go through and look at the ones of greatest threat to the United States. So to me, the ones of greatest threat are the ones that have a corporate structure. You know, they're recruiting, they're morale boosting, they're fundraising, they're just like a corporation. They have vast resources, they're very adaptable, they're impermeable, so we can't get inside to see what's happening. We can't get inside and try to implode these groups from the inside. They have a persistent ideology, it doesn't change year to year. They have staying power. Hezbollah and Hamas have been with us since the 60s. These groups are undefeatable in my estimation. And religious ideology is the most dangerous. They're apocalyptic. They believe that they carry out their actions in the name of a higher God. So that's where you might see like a WMD attack, for instance. And the military tactic of decimation, which is take off the top 10% of a group and it falls apart, is not effective against modern terrorist organizations. So let's talk about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, we're in the 26-year war with Al-Qaeda. I know it seems improbable, but if you go all the way back to 1996, this is when Osama bin Laden declared war on the US. And now we're in phase 5 of the war. Leadership of Al-Qaeda is mobilizing right now for the declaration of the caliphate. And so the National Counterterrorism Center says we are still at war with Al-Qaeda. They're persistent. Al-Qaeda is more sophisticated. This Al-Qaeda version, which is maybe like the 5.0, is more sophisticated than what we've seen in the past. And so their direct affiliates are all over the world, as you can see. And then there are all these indirect affiliates as well popping up. And some we've had for a while with us. I want to draw your attention to this publication. So Al-Qaeda issued this in June 2020. So think about the pandemic. We just came out of a lockdown, basically, from the pandemic. And this issue of One Ummah came out. It's issue 2. Issue 1 was a little bit smaller, but issue 2 really caught our attention because, first of all, it was written in perfect English. It was at a very high academic level. It's about 72 pages long, and they really dissect all of the issues that were happening in the US at the time with our economy, with protests, with our handling of the pandemic. And what they did was not only dissect that, but also explain ways that other groups or that groups that they are calling to action could exploit it. And so I have a clean copy of this One Ummah magazine. If you would like this, I'd be happy to email it to you. But I think it's important for us to realize that there are a lot of there's a lot of academic thought and a lot of really deep thinkers that focus in on these issues. And this really hit the reset button for us on Al-Qaeda. Now we'll talk about ISIS, regrouping. So the direct affiliates, you can see they're all over the world. I highlighted ISIL-K because this is in the news. They're stepping into the void that we left in Afghanistan in a big way right now. And on the indirect affiliates, there are 3 highlighted in blue. These are Al-Qaeda splinters who've also pledged their allegiance to ISIS. So this is definitely an area that we're looking at. If these 2 groups could merge resources, tactical ideas, logistic trails, things like that. So definitely a concern. And I won't read this to you, but there's a lot of study happening, and this is actually from last year. I'm waiting for some new information to come out about what's happening this spring, but ISIS is definitely resurgent, and they'll go to an area that's left uncovered. And for instance, the French just pulled out of an area in West Africa, and immediately these groups they're already there, but they're sending more people there. They'll go in to fill that void. They're also more sophisticated. This group, Horizons, it's their information security group. They have an InfoSec group. Again, very high level thinking and very technically competent people in this group. They put this Supporter Security magazine out. It was tips for online jihadists to exploit apps, methods to avoid detection. It was printed in German, it was in Spanish, it was in a lot of different languages to kind of hit all their markets, if you will. And they talked about how to exploit devices and operating systems and hack, and it's just a very high level. Again, it's something that we had not seen before. And this just came out in January. This is the Khorasan ISIL-K, and again, written at a very high level, the voice of Khorasan. It's important for you to read this to understand what they're thinking, and also the tactical information that they're putting out there for people, and also how are they inciting them to action. Like right now, there's a call for lone actors. So online recruitment, this is where it all happens. What they do is there's a group of people who are online all day, mostly on Facebook. They're looking for disaffected Americans who are venting, who are angry about something. They seek them out, they isolate them, they tell them, don't tell anybody we're having this conversation, and then they encourage them to go to operational mode. So we had an attack at Ohio State in 2016, and this student, Ali Artan, so he was a straight A student at a community college. He just transferred to Ohio State, and he asked them where he could worship. He was looking for a mosque. And they actually had a multi-purpose religious facility on the campus, but they failed to get back to him. So he was on Facebook complaining about this. He was recruited by ISIS. He worked at Home Depot. He was the Home Depot Employee of the Month. They recruited him. He went to Home Depot. He bought a knife. He called in a bomb threat to his chemistry class. And when they came out of the building, he drove his vehicle into his class, and then he started to stab people. So this is where the internet has really become a problem, because if we don't get involved in this cycle, if we don't see this happening, then there's no way to stop it, basically. So during the pandemic, terrorism and crime did not stop. As a matter of fact, it escalated, which was pretty disappointing to see. But during the pandemic, these are just some of the plots, and there's so many more, but there was a college plot, hotel plot, there was an attack at a Navy base, plot to blow up the White House and Trump Tower. Seattle man tried to join ISIS and plan an attack on the Seattle Pride Parade. It goes on and on. This is just a very small sliver of what happened during the pandemic and is still happening today. So this is what I do when I look at a case study. It's really important for you to dig into these case studies, because in the press, you only see a little bit of what happened. But when you look at the charging papers and you go out and really dig, you find so many great details that informs your security practice. So the Colleyville synagogue attack, this is where this British citizen took 4 people, including a rabbi, hostage in this little town in Texas. We've come to find out he was on the MI5 watch list, and then they moved him to a former subject of interest list and no longer considered a threat. So he was able to fly to the US. He gained access to the synagogue during the service by claiming to be homeless. So that's important information. He demanded the release of Siddiqui. She's a Pakistani, long backstory on her. But the important thing is he flew here to the United States and went to Texas with all this in mind. This was a plot. The rabbi fought back and the hostages escaped. That's quite interesting to read about. He had the run, hide, fight training, and he decided it was time to fight, and he probably saved their lives. During the standoff, live real-time chat by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and white supremacist groups. They were all chatting live about the situation, which is something that we hadn't seen before either. This was a wake-up call for us. First of all, he was Al-Qaeda influenced. This shows us the ongoing threat of foreign terror. He was a traveler. He came here purposely to do this. And this was a confluence of issues and ideology with this individual. He had mental health issues. He was radicalized. He had personal grievances. He was anti-vax, anti-government. So it's not easy. It shows how complex it is. But in your organization, find somebody who loves to do this deep digging research that can pull this together for you. So if there's an attack in the US or even a plot, plots are very important to look into as well, or overseas, Harvest all the information from that, and it should inform your security practice. You know, our security plans can't be on the shelf anymore. They have to be very flexible and tailored to what's happening with threats and actors. So Al-Qaeda and ISIS have similar strategies. Number one, soft targets are the primary choice. They're focused on overwhelming and exhausting us, the US, which they've dragged us into billions of dollars of security, wars, and everything else. So definitely a success there. Leveraging the pandemic, they didn't care that people were dying. They're piling misery on misery. That's what bad actors do. And then they're infiltrating, like I said before, destabilizing and exploiting failed states, using the internet to boost morale, to share, perfect tactics, and drones. Use of drones has really skyrocketed with these groups and with cartels as well. Cartels now are using drones as shooting platforms. Recently, they loaded them with C4 and used them as bombs. And then there's a lot of chatter right now about weapons of mass destruction with these groups. Biological. So you'll see there's been from the government side a lot more information about biological warfare. Some webinars, some universities and think tanks have done webinars on bio in the last few weeks. If you ever see a spike in a certain topic, then know that there's something behind that. There's something cooking. New tactics quickly spread. So the good news for us is we can prepare, we can plan. This is real quick, I won't read it, but the evolution of the truck into crowd attack, you know, really started in 2015 with some propaganda, ended up on our doorstep in 2017 after some horrific attacks in Europe. So if something happens overseas, it feels like it's really far away, but just know that we might see that here, so we need to prepare. Trends, this is another thing that's really important for you or someone in your organization to look at. What are the trends? Attack trends have been very creative. This 4th of July plot, Demetrius Pitts, he was going to drive into the 4th of July parade. I believe this was in 2018. But again, that's what the newspapers reported. I read the charging papers. He also had a side plot. He'd gone to Radio Shack and bought remote control vehicles. He was going to put explosives in those and give them to the children of military. There was a side event at the 4th of July parade, and he was going to target the children of military. Again, those are the things that inform our security practice. Usually there's surveillance, so our security guard force knows how to look for surveillance. What does it look like when you're being surveilled? Multiple attacks, so if something happens in one part of the city, you know, we should plan as if maybe that's coming to our doorstep. Targeting people fleeing exits, this is a big one. Attacking at the end of the event, usually if there's an event like a parade or 4th of July, something, we start to let our guard down at the end. And we used to do this with air shows sometimes. We'd even have, you know, still have the Thunderbirds to fly or another act on Sunday afternoon, and we'd start to break things down, kind of get in that mentality that, phew, we got through it. But we can't do that because recent events, recent attacks are at the end of the event because they know that we let our guard down. Targeting first responders, this is a whole separate subject I'm happy to talk to you about offline. And then hostages, if hostages are taken, they're doomed captives. Thankfully, the rabbi figured out how to attack the person there and get everybody out, but possibly they were doomed captives. So really hesitating and negotiating, things like that, it's not going to be helpful. Domestic terror in the US, we know about all these groups. What I really want to focus in on are the wild card groups that seem to pop up out of nowhere. And a cautionary tale with the Boogaloo Boys, which seemed like a joke. You know, they wore these Hawaiian shirts, they had this funny turtle patch. Everybody thought it was a big joke, but it ended up in death with a US Air Force Security Forces sniper who became a Boogaloo Boy. And he went to, he lived in California, he targeted 2 law enforcement agents and killed them, one from afar as a sniper and the other one when they came to arrest him. So it's not a joke. So when these groups come on the scene, we need to treat them as potential threats. And I just got this from the news. So this was a domestic terrorism plot, excuse me, that was white supremacist ideology. So this group of white supremacists were going to attack the power grid. I won't get into the whole thing, but it's, again, this, you have to keep on top of what's happening with plots as well. So a lot of reading, but there's always someone in the organization that loves to do this. And DHS, always read their National Terrorism Advisory System bulletins. This one just came out February 7th, and it's about mis, dis, and malinformation, or MDM. This is a new topic. And this is about the exploitation of the internet and using the internet to spread misinformation. And like I said, a lot of times it ends up with violence. So it's very important for us to watch. Crime's escalating. 2019 was the worst year for crime in all these sectors. We had a lot of mass shootings and some majors in 2019. 2020 was worse. 2021 was even worse. So here we are during the pandemic, it's just escalating. And as of today, there's been 64 mass shootings in the US. So we're on track to not have a great year again. I just wanted to show you this. This is when we came out of the lockdown in June 2020, how mass shootings escalated. It was very, very startling to see. We're very alarmed. Homicide went way up in 2020 in major cities. And then this is just a pictorial of what happened last year. So I have a lot of information in my slides, but and I'm not covering it specifically, but you will have a copy of my slides, and I want to make sure you have all this data. Other challenges: drugs, opioid use skyrocketed during the pandemic, gangs skyrocketed, and cartels as well. It's just not a good news story. And lone actor terror. We don't call them lone wolves anymore. The word wolf was sort of aggrandizing, so we call it lone actor terror. LAT is the terminology now. And it's doubled in the last decade. Of course, these people are off the radar, and we don't know what they're thinking or what they're going to do. And this is the downtown Nashville, the bomb that the guy built in his van. I guess it was just a suicide in the end, but still. Devastating attack. Thankfully, it was in the morning and there weren't a lot of Christmas shoppers out yet. Insider threat is on the rise. Don't assume serious insider threats are Nemo, not in my organization. We have to fight that because humans, again, human condition, people are struggling maybe financially. We're about to lay them off or they have to or fire them. People are melting down for different reasons. And so we have to fight Nemo. These are all real cases that employees have been used by outsiders to stockpile weapons, to get blueprints, give blueprints to bad actors. They've given info or sold it or access, just leave the back door open, leave the loading dock open. These are ways that bad actors could leverage your employees to do harm. And again, if your employees are on the internet and they're vocalizing their anger or angst with the organization, they're out there for recruiting. The hiring process, it seems like companies do great with hiring. Onboarding, the person starts to maybe get a little bit lost in the organization. So I say pair them up with the senior person for like a last eyes on, and then steady state. Once they're in the organization, a lot of times they're forgotten. So you need to definitely have some kind of a program for reporting for employees. Usually somebody knows if their peer or their colleague is melting down. How do you harvest that data? What do you do with it? You need to have a plan. And like I say, everyone has a public life, a private life, and a secret life. That secret life is where they're unraveling, and that's where they're going to bring danger to your doorstep. I did a presentation at ASIS at the GSX conference in the fall, and it was government strategies, cross-applying government strategies on insider threat to the private sector, because there's a lot we do in the government. Obviously, we have people with security clearances around nuclear weapons. There's a lot of that you can harvest and use for your own organization. And I'm happy to talk to you about that offline and also give you my slides from that event. Insider threat and terrorism, it's the keys to the kingdom. The insider has knowledge, proprietary knowledge. They know all the vulnerabilities. They know schedules. They know everything. So terrorists obviously have exploited insiders to conduct attacks. And as the National Counterterrorism says, they view them as valuable assets. Convergence is another word. I'm not sure if you heard. This is what we use when two disjointed security functions collaborate. And so security convergence is often referred to as converged security. Or blended attacks is when there's an attack against two security functions. So this is from CISA, from the Cyber and Physical Security Convergence website, which is quite an interesting website to visit. And the only reason I want to bring this up is because I see in my consulting right now, excuse me, that there's a move of resources away from physical security to cyber. And I just want to caution everybody against that. Obviously, we need to cover cyber, and that could take our company out easily, but don't do it at the expense of physical. You need to do everything. I know it's hard to do that, especially with limited resources, but I see a movement, for instance, from the guard force to drones, or the guard force to security robots, things like that. So just be careful. Keep your eye on the physical security as well. And remember that the bad actors are creative, like we said before. You could protect your system from hackers, but they could turn the air conditioning off. They could turn the heat up. They could put your sprinkler system on, and they could still ruin your servers. They could still ruin all of your information without ever hacking into it. So just consider that and kind of keep an eye on it, because I'm seeing this happen. So what can we do? Well, before we get into what we could do, I want to just talk about Russia for a second. I don't have a slide for Russia. Obviously, Vladimir Putin has had this plan for a long time. Back in the 90s, Russia asked to join NATO. They didn't formally apply. They did a soft ask a couple times and they were told no. That didn't go over very well. Now we can imagine if we let them join NATO where we would be today, which is kind of interesting to think about. But Putin's always said that since 2007 that he saw the expansion of NATO as an aggression towards Russia. He's always said he wants Ukraine to reunite with Russia for this mother Russia. He's just carrying out a plan that he's had for a long time. So it doesn't really matter what's happening in the world. Obviously, we have a pandemic. He doesn't care who the president is. He doesn't care. This is his plan. So in terms of preparation for something like that, I like to look at preparation as all hazards. If we prepare for to a high level for a hurricane, for a grid attack, for a prolonged blackout, whatever we prepare for, it should be all hazards. We should be prepared for every scenario. So instead of preparing for one thing, maybe use that mindset that we're ready for everything. But yeah, it's very scary. He turned 70 this year, and the average life expectancy for men in Russia is 73, I found out. So he might see the end of his life approaching, and he's not self-actualized yet. But this has been going on for a long time. The Cold War was never over, as we know in the military. So we're not surprised by his actions or actually his timing either. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And that's a whole other discussion. But yes, we have many threats. We have China, we have Iran. We have a lot of threats. So it's just focus on that all hazards approach to preparation and rolling into what we can do. We can do a lot of things. It's very heavy when you look at everything that's happening in all aspects of crime and terror. But just remember, there's so much we can do. We can know the threat, which we just went through the threat, identify the target, assess vulnerability, calculate risk, and then harden and mitigate. So let's talk about soft targets quickly. Check my time. Okay, soft target is a civilian-centric place. It's not typically fortified. Security is not a primary mission, so security sometimes with places when I go out to consult, security is not even in the strategic plan. It's not really a line item in the budget. It's just something that it's kind of an afterthought. So it leaves these facilities, it could be small businesses, stadiums, anything, a store, a mall, hotel, airport, vulnerable, unprotected, and basically undefended. Privately owned, so when we go out and we give suggestions for how they can harden, they don't have to do it. It's up to them whether they cover that or not. Possibly resource constrained, like churches and schools, and maybe co-located near hard targets, which complicates things. So again, going back to the psychology, let's talk about the psychology of soft targeting. 90% of casualties in conflicts are now civilians. We're seeing that right now happening in Syria, Yemen, excuse me, and in Ukraine, of course. And this has changed through the years because it used to be Army versus Army, Navy versus Navy, and now it's downtown, the fight's downtown. And we, as the US, we protect these targets. We don't purposely strike them, so it's horrifying for us. This is a picture from Ukraine from a kindergarten that was hit by a missile a few days ago. Because we're bound by law, Geneva Convention, religious doctrine, or rules of engagement. So we need to think like the bad guys, and when we think about protecting a school bus filled with children, or a church, and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around because we wouldn't target those organizations, those facilities, but the bad guys will. And so sometimes we have a blind spot and we have a huge vulnerability because we don't think like them. So we have to go there in our mind. What do we most fear and how should we respond? And these are just some truths that I found from my soft target hardening work. Not seen doesn't mean not there. A lot of people, before they spend security money, they want to know what's the threat. Show me the threat. I want to see the threat. We don't know. As we said, there's lone actors out there. There's a lot happening we don't know about. That doesn't mean we don't do anything. We still have to secure our organizations and our events. I said before, security actions can't be canned anymore. They have to be tailored, constantly adjusting, fluid. Copycat attacks, we should expect them. And the goal of hardening is to remove the bad guy from the fight before it starts. And I want to tell you the story of Omar Mateen, the Pulse nightclub shooter. That wasn't his target. The night of his operation, he was going to Disney Springs, to the shopping area, and he went to Disney Springs. And his tactic was to have a baby carriage and push it in with his weapon and then open fire in Disney Springs. He went into Disney Springs with the baby carriage, with the weapon. He took some photos on his phone, which is how we know what he was doing. And there was a lot of armed security that evening for whatever reason, and it deterred him. So he went back to his vehicle and he started to Google on his phone. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and what's open? Nightclubs. The first one was Eve nightclub in Orlando that came up. So he went to Eve, he had a look at Eve. He didn't like what he saw. He thought it was too hard to hit. So he kept Googling and he found Pulse. He looked at Pulse. He went back to Eve and then he went back to Pulse. So when we tear apart these attacks, we can really see what deterred him. Obviously he's dead, so we can't ask him, but this is really important. It's important for security practice. And maybe some of you never heard that information because the press didn't really cover it. I found it in the charging papers. I found it in the investigation, in the after action reports. So again, got to do a lot of research. Vulnerability. Your ability to deter attack is amplified by understanding your vulnerability. And there's so many ways to do that. The Carver methodology, which I teach, this is a fantastic way to really dig into your vulnerabilities and also to rank order them because everything can't be covered. We already know that. So Carver method, I really encourage you to get the book, read up on it, and learn about it. The risk management framework, which Department of Defense uses, this is a way to, again, rank ordering your risks so that you can effectively and appropriately apply your limited resources to bring your security level up as high as possible. You have to have a method. And then mitigation. How do you mitigate once you figure this out? This is the system I cross-applied from the government. It's a effects-based hardening. This is a way to visualize violent scenarios unemotionally through a data-driven lens, because when you talk to people about active shooter, about terrorist attack, there's fear. There's a lot of emotion around the topic and you get a little bit lost. So this is a good way to focus in on the data and then to harmonize and prioritize security activities and have like synchronized plan, because a lot of times when money comes in, we just put up cameras. We're going to do badges next year. We're going to do locks the year after. There's no plan. There has to be a security plan. It has to be synchronized and prioritized. And just because you don't have the money this year to do everything, you can still do something. I see that too. I see inaction. So hardening tactics, remember the goal is to remove the enemy from the fight before it starts. Deterring, deflecting, deceiving. I was a tactical deception officer in the military. This is what we did with our bases and with our planes and people. Make the target appear harder than it is. If you can't cover all of your bases, use language on your website. Think of Omar Mateen looking at websites. What if the Pulse nightclub said that thank you to our local security for being with us tonight, or we have armed security on the premises, be prepared for bag checks. The language that you use could deter a bad actor. The signage, you could have robust signage. This area is under surveillance. Signage, a lot of times when I go out, the parking lot has no signage and there's all sorts of things happening in the parking lot. Security is great from the front door in, but our employees park in the parking lot, so we need to protect them. So language, signage, and then just different things you can do. This is a photograph from a compound in Qatar. I lived in the Middle East for 2 years, from 2013 to 2015. And they would take these old vehicles and put security striping on them and kind of repurpose them as security vehicles and then park them around the compound. So if the bad actor peeked in there, they might think that there's a stronger security presence than what we really had. So the bottom line is the best defense is a good offense. Get on the offensive. Signage, we have way too much signage. Somebody who heard my presentation sent this to me from California. It says kindergarten on it. Why would you announce to everybody that this is the building that has the most vulnerable population, not only just for attack, but also there's a lot happening with child kidnapping and things. So signage, look at your signage. And when I lived in the Middle East, I noticed a lack of signage, which I thought was really interesting. People know where they're going. So do you really need to have the signs? Bake in security. When you do new construction, think about security. Don't slap it on after the fact. First of all, it's more expensive when you do that. But the security people should be with your engineers and with your designers and your developers hand in hand. So these are just some photos from Doha. And I won't get too much into this, but everything's built with blast resistant windows. It's beautiful, as you can see. And there's this compound mentality. The bottom right picture is Church City in Doha. There's 5 different types of churches in there with thousands of people on the weekend. I think I want to say even like 50 or 60,000. Everybody goes through one security area and comes in to the church campus and then goes to the church of their choosing. So it's different than in the US, where every building has its own security. So if you can, in some way, when you're constructing, wrap your arms around everything and have one layer of security for everybody to go through to get in. Attractive fortification, when I tell people that they need more barricades or barriers, they roll their eyes because they think it's ugly. So I've started taking photos in my travels of beautiful security, works of art, planters, fountains. This is just a way for you to sell security to your leadership. Layered defense, this is what we do with the military, you know, put the target at the middle, and then we have all these layers of defense. I don't see this a lot when I go out to consult. And so I wanted to just mention this to you. Your target might be a person, it could be information, it could be a building, it could be a room, whatever that target is, put layers of security around it, put tripwires out there for the bad actors to get through to get to the target. And again, almost with every slide is a whole presentation. So I'm just kind of hitting the keynotes here. Right of bang, this is school security equipment that schools are buying, and this has done nothing to prevent an attack. These are all right of bang. This is after the attack. Gunshot detection, places for you to hide, police call boxes, these slides, which I think is just, I can think of a million ways that this is a bad idea. So before you invest money in security, ask, what will this do to protect people? What will this do to stop the attack? Informed response, get the data, you know, and I use bomb threats as an example. Here's what we envision. Here's what we experience. Evacuation. Sometimes people don't come back to work, or they fall on the way out because they're running, leave their purses behind and they're stolen, things like that. So that's what we experience. But if you peel it back with bomb threats, you know, one of these four things is happening. There's no bomb. That's the most likely scenario. Maybe the bomb's outside. Maybe it's inside, or maybe it's an ambush. Maybe they're trying to flush you out. So when you look at the data, why do we evacuate? When I ask people, what's your plan for a bomb threat? You get a bomb threat, what do? We evacuate. That may not be the best plan of action. Buildings provide great protection. And if you could clear one area like the cafeteria or the library, put everybody in there, clear the rest of the building, maybe it's better than flushing them out in the parking lot. Think vehicle into crowd, for instance. So the only reason I show this is for informed response. In your security plan, you should have some data, you should have some methodology behind your response. This is just bombing incidents, so you can see that went up in 2020 as well. Research, go out and do your research. This is what burglars say would have deterred them. These are convicted burglars. The number one most effective deterrent was people inside. Then it was officer nearby. The alarm system was down the road there a little bit. So people, humans deter. Martin Gill talked to murderers on death row, and he found out, you know, that they favor large, bulky security guards because they can be outrun. That's interesting to know. So there's so much data out there. You know, seeing the crime scene through the eyes of a criminal is invaluable. This is Sandy Hook entrance, brand new steel cage doors on the left, and the shooter just went through the plate glass. Now that you see this, you can't unsee it. You see it at pretty much, you know, a lot of buildings that you go to, but that's why external set of eyes is important. This is something I took from one of my own consulting, the security gate, which is like a ladder, basically could be over that in about 10 seconds. Realistic training, your exercises have to be realistic. In the military, we exercise to failure. We push all the way. We don't start at 9, break for lunch, and finish at 3. Bad guys lose, good guys win. That's not reality. So when you do exercise, please make sure it's a realistic scenario and push everybody. Be prepared on social media, because when something happens to your organization and you're not out there, somebody else is going to take over and it's out there forever. It could really be reputation damaging. Pre-craft your messages. That's what we do in the military. We have them all on the shelf. When something happens, a plane crash, whatever, we pull it off the shelf. We have our message and we communicate. We get on the offensive. And red teaming, get that outside assessment. Crisis response, think about taking care of your people first and then the operation. I see the switch sometimes when I go out. Again, pre-craft those crisis messages. Who are your crisis leaders? There's some people in the organization that really rise to the occasion. Maybe they have training. They are former EMTs. Harness the skills on your staff and use that for your crisis response team. Prepare, because how you handle crisis, whether good or bad, is going to, that's going to do something to your reputation, whether it's good or bad. So this is all worth your time. And it's hard. I know everybody's really busy, but it's important to focus on. Make sure your employees know the sound of gunfire. Citizen response to active shooter, CRAS. I'm actually an instructor in that. First thing we do is play a sound bite. We tell everybody we're doing it. This is what gunfire sounds like, because a lot of people don't know. And that hesitation is the difference between life and death for them. Invest in life-saving, life-preserving training for your staff, because first responders aren't going to be right there on the scene. And there's this golden hour where we need to engage and stop bleeding and help people survive. And this all takes time, again, and it takes resources, but always ask, what's the cost of not doing this? What is the cost of not protecting our facility, employees, and visitors? And here's the takeaways. So go back, remember the emotional traps I talked about. We have to fight and address those. Strongly consider insider threat and fight that Nemo, not in my organization. Identify your Achilles heel. What is your top vulnerability? And cover it. And then your whole level of security has come up dramatically. Think rings of security, those layers of defense around the target. Focus your security resources left of bang, preventative. How can we prevent the attack? Use data and case studies to inform your security plans. I gave some good examples of how to do that. Realistic exercise and practice, that's resiliency. We all want resiliency in our organization. When people wrap their minds around the fact that we could be attacked, here's what I'm going to do. I have a plan. They're so much better equipped to rise to the occasion if it happens. And use technology to complement human security, not replace it. And I touched on that a little bit, but I just want to leave you with that thought. So we can strike a balance between normalcy and vigilance. Citizens are expecting and demanding security. There's no, people's malls, retail locations. I don't want to have security. I don't want to be a fortress. I don't want to scare people away. Trust me when I say that people want security, they want to feel safe, and it's going to pull them in. It's going to pull them in. They're making dollar money decisions based on their assessment. So the bottom line is not doing nothing because it's easier to just bury our heads in the sand as reckless and naive. There are a lot of threats out there, but again, there's a lot we can do. The Art of War, great book. We are in a war in different ways. And it teaches us not to think about that, is the enemy coming? Is the bad guy coming? Is it going to happen? Could it happen? Not me, not here. But focus on the fact that we've made our position unassailable. That's what you want to do. You want to shape the environment and culture you want, your security environment and culture. Take control, be proactive, get on the offensive, and don't apologize for it. Here's my contact information. I would love to chat with you more after the presentation. I have so much more to say, obviously. Please reach out to me anytime. And William Webster, I started with his quote. I met him last year at a conference in Virginia. That's him and me on the right there. He was in the hallway and I just stopped him and I got to tell him, sir, I use your quote at the beginning of all my presentations. He was 93. He actually flew to Virginia from Los Angeles for a conference and he was looking for a New York Times, which was amazing. So just like to end with that photo. And I still have time for questions and feedback.
Jenny, thank you very much for that really informative presentation. And we'll take some questions from the audience. Before we get into that Q&A, I have a question that I would like to ask of the audience. And we won't share the results on this call, so please feel free to answer candidly. My question is, would you like to learn more about Topo AI or more about watermark risk management? To just pick whichever one best suits your needs. Select option A if you'd like to learn more about the Topo One CEM and incidents platform. Select option B if you'd like to learn more about risk management or training and education or commercial and government sources from Watermark. Select C to learn more about both of our organizations, or select option D if you are not interested at this time. We'll give folks just a moment to respond there. And thank you. We've got some really great questions coming in for the audience. So thank you very much for sending those in.
There's one I'd like to address too, Andrew, when you're ready for me.
Yeah, sure. You can go ahead and address that now.
Okay, fantastic. I have a comment from Michael. He's a rabbi at a synagogue, and it sounded like the presentation was only focused on Muslims. I did not mean that. When I had the domestic terrorism groups, I had right, left. I have a whole presentation built behind that one slide. Yes, synagogue attacks have been carried out by white supremacists. They've been carried out by all different types of groups and people, not just Muslims. I certainly did not mean to just focus in on ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Muslims at all. There's so many domestic terror groups that we need to worry about that attack everything. So I certainly didn't mean for that.
Thanks for addressing that, Jenny. And I just, sometimes early in a broadcast too, they might have had the opportunity to hear everything that you had to say for the duration of the broadcast. And thank you for addressing that. Mm-hmm. So somebody asked the question that they're looking for emerging threats to physical security to use as a topic for their security awareness program or article. You just gave a bunch of potential options there. I think. Do you have any ways to recommend that they might select the top one or two?
Well, that's hard because there's so many. I mean, it kind of depends on your organization because like I said before, drones, we're really seeing an increase by all groups and all types of actors using drones, but maybe that doesn't affect your organization depending on where you are. WMD, when we go out and do a vulnerability assessment, we look at the air conditioning system, we look at the venting, things like that. I worked for Major League Baseball, and we talked about the vending, the food vendors. So just the ketchup pumps, the mustard pumps, somebody could contaminate those. A bunch of people could leave the stadium and get sick before we even figure out what's happening. And some stadiums have gone to packets now. It's more expensive, but it covers that vulnerability. So it's hard for me to say which threat really that you would need to focus on. I would say insider threat is something we all need to focus on. And I mean, it's a huge concern. So definitely focus on that in your organization.
Thank you. And just in your research on soft target hardening, have you found any aspects that people overlook the most or kind of common mistakes that organizations make?
I think it's that layered defense. It's those rings of security. Security doesn't start at the front door, and it goes out into the neighborhood. When I was number 2 at Andrews Air Force Base, as I mentioned before, I had a relationship with all the people outside the gate. So the McDonald's manager, the Arby's, there were 2 hotels, there was Dunkin' Donuts, 7-Elevens. I couldn't, when I was sitting in my office on Andrews, I couldn't see outside the gate. I had no idea what was happening out there. So I formed a relationship with them, which paid off in a couple ways when they called and told me about someone taking a picture of our gate with a long lens camera and things like that. But I did a mall project for DHS. We went to a major US city about 8 years ago to protect 6 malls against terrorist attack. And these are malls that were kind of singled out by some groups as possible targets. And it was fascinating to me. Each mall had a different security laydown. I'd say all of them did not know the stores on the perimeter, like the Red Lobster, the Best Buy, the typical stores that are around the mall. So we brought all those managers in. We had them build a relationship because bad stuff doesn't just start at the front door. It starts out, out in the street, in the community, on the internet. There's a lot of tools you can use now. So when people are talking about your organization or your event, like on Twitter, there's a tool you can use, like who's tweeting about your event. You can go out and harvest this information and see if there's going to be some kind of flash mob, maybe, or if there's some other, protest that's heading your way. So there's tools that you can use to get out, but that's part of your layered security as well, is internet, what's happening on the internet. So really those rings of security, that layered defense is what I see.
That's a really excellent point. And I know firsthand there are some teams that are doing fantastic work using social media and deep and dark web intelligence to help inform their security practices.
Because a lot of people vocalize now, so we can take advantage of that.
That's a really good point. And so you mentioned a number of particular plots that you've seen that your research has uncovered. Are there any in particular that you see trending in special events or for large public venues like malls, retail, hospitality that really caught your attention or were cause for alarm?
I think, I would say all, it depends on if the actor, sometimes they plan their attacks for years, and sometimes it's just that you get off the couch, get the weapon and go carry something out. Anytime we have a group of people, it's vulnerable, they're vulnerable. And so when you have here in Charleston, I live in Charleston, South Carolina, we do Second Sunday where they block off King Street, which is a main street in Charleston, for people just to walk around with their dogs and eat and everything. And now they really do a good job of blocking all those side streets, so the truck into crowd thing, that's always going to be a weapon of choice because it's easy to get, it's easy to use, and easy to hurt people with. So any kind of outdoor event needs to be protected, and we need to think about the truck into crowd event. I think that's still a hot tactic on the list, but no real particular trend towards a certain type of organization. I mean, churches are always going to be a target, unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons. Looking at the church attacks, the Pittsburgh synagogue attack, there's a lot we can learn from that. There was a synagogue attack overseas where the door was locked and it prevented the shooter from getting in. So just locking your door. When I work with churches, I try to tell them to lock the doors. They don't want to do it. But the way I tell them is when I lived in the Middle East and I went through security to go to church, when I got inside the church, I could focus on worshiping. When I went to the library or to a school and daughter was in high school, they could focus on learning because of the security that they know that they went through and everybody else went through. So during a church service, if somebody comes in the back door, the priest looks up. We all look back. We're distracted. So there's a way to lock the door and still be open and welcoming, but really locking your door is security 101. It's what we do at our house, but just basic things like that. But again, to go out and really look at what's happening with plots and actual attacks, and then bake that into our security practice is important.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you have time for just one more question?
Sure, of course.
Sure.
I could talk all day.
And I want to thank Daniel, who shared a relevant resource with the group on soft targets. So I'll include that link that Daniel shared in the follow-up materials for the audience. So then just we had a member ask, are there any specific risks that you foresee as a result of the situation in Ukraine?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think the banking sector would be the first one hit. In my personal opinion, and I'm not a cyber expert, but I would definitely prepare for some type of banking issue, ATMs going offline, problems like that. And then I think the fuel pipeline, that would be another issue that we should prepare for. But it's basic preparation, right? And I know during hurricane season here, I'm always prepared. I've got my stuff in the pantry. I've got my cash, my go bag. I've got a plan. And if you have pets, that's another thing you have to focus in on. If you would have to evacuate, where would you take them and how and what they need? But again, it's just kind of preparing that all hazards preparation. If you prepare properly, your organization, your home, your family, you're ready. You're ready for what could happen as a result of Ukraine. You're ready for what could happen as a result of the white supremacists that we're going to take out the grid. We don't know who the bad actors are or what they're planning. So we just need to focus on our own preparation.
I think that's a really insightful point. I'll just add another one that occurred to me yesterday. So many of our businesses are reliant upon the internet and reliant, especially in a hybrid environment, reliant upon cloud-based collaboration. And so if you lose connection to the internet, how much of your work are you capable of doing?
Right.
And so after a short internet outage yesterday, I downloaded all of my task lists to a copy on my machine so I can continue to do my work if something else happens.
I think that's a wake-up call. And actually, I'll tell you, our power went out a couple days ago. Our power never goes out unless it's a hurricane. That caught my attention. And I started to think about, am I ready? Do I have my backup plan? So it's just a good time for us to dust all those off.
That's a really excellent point. And so I think then that brings us to the end of the broadcast. We're a little past 3 p.m. Eastern. I'd like to thank Dr. Jenny Hesterman for today's discussion. Just such a thorough presentation, Jenny. And thank you very much. You're quite welcome. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us today. And thanks for sending in those questions. We hope that it provided some actionable information, some practical steps that you can take, some frameworks you can use to mitigate risk in your organizations. And just 2 other items for me. We have some results forthcoming on our security operations benchmark study. So if you'd like to reserve a copy of that, I'll send you a link so that you can get your copy first. And then also, if you plan to attend ISC West this year, please stop by and visit us in booth 20127. We'd love to see you there. So on behalf of Dr. Jenny Hesterman and Watermark Risk Management, we hope that everyone stays safe and that we have peace soon in Ukraine. Thank you for attending, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.